Ethan Waller moved into Unit 4B of the Briarwood Apartments with the intent of starting over. After losing his job and quietly ending a long, hollow relationship, he was desperate for something simple, something that didn't ask questions. The building was old and cheap, nestled in the edge of a tired town in upstate New York, where the leaves always seemed half dead and the sky held a permanent layer of grey. Briarwood had 4 floors. Unit 4B was top right, just beneath the slanted roof, and its only neighbour on that floor was Unit 4A, a unit that, according to the landlord and the dusty black no entry sign taped to its door, had been unoccupied for nearly 7 years. Ethan didn't mind the isolation. In fact, he welcomed it. He needed the silence, and for the first few nights, that's exactly what he got. Cold drafts crept in through poorly sealed windows, radiators clanged like dying metal, the hallway lights flickered occasionally, all expected, all manageable. But on the 6th night, the screaming started. It was just past 2:15 a.m. when he first heard it. At first, he thought it was a dream, that thin, desperate edge of sound that rides the border between waking and sleeping. It was high-pitched, panicked, and unnatural, like someone pleading from the back of their throat while being dragged underwater. He sat upright in bed, heart racing, waiting for it to repeat. When it didn't, he tried to sleep again. But at 2:19 a.m., it returned, louder, more frantic. The sound came directly from the other side of the wall shared with the supposedly abandoned 4A. For nearly a minute, the screaming continued. There were no footsteps, no voices, just this shrill, rising cry, like the purest form of terror ever compressed into sound. Then, silence. Ethan didn't sleep the rest of the night. The next morning, he paced in front of the 4A door. The hallway was as dead as ever, its yellow walls stained with nicotine and cracked wallpaper. The black tape still held that flimsy paper sign on the door, though it had curled at the edges like something trying to peel itself free. No light came from the bottom of the door, no movement inside. He pressed his ear to the surface. Nothing. He went downstairs to the landlord's office, but it was closed. The note taped to the window read, "Out for the week. Emergency. Call 911. The building manager lived off-site, a retired man who only came once every few days for maintenance. That night, he tried playing white noise, music, even running the TV. It didn't matter. At exactly 2:15 a.m., the screaming returned. This time, it was worse, louder, longer, piercing. It seemed to come not just from the other side of the wall, but from inside it, like it had moved closer. The pitch wavered like a broken siren, raw and human, yet impossibly distorted. Again, it ended after exactly 1 minute. Ethan didn't sleep. He stared at the ceiling until dawn, heart thudding, palms damp. On the 8th night, he pressed his phone against the wall and recorded the sound. When he played it back the next morning, all he heard was static. He turned up the volume, scrubbed the waveform. Nothing. The recording had captured the quiet hum of his own apartment, but none of the screams. He tried again the next night, live recording, even tried going Facebook Live to share it with someone, anyone. But each time, silence. 2:15 a.m. would come, and the screaming would fill the walls, but only to him. By day 10, Ethan had stopped leaving his apartment. His food ran low, his curtains remained drawn. He no longer showered. He sat on his floor, back against the shared wall, knees pulled to his chest, waiting. The screaming had changed. Now there were 2 voices, one higher, one deeper, both screaming, overlapping in a sick, echoing chorus that vibrated the drywall and made his molars ache. He began to see shapes in the shadows, long, hunched outlines with jagged limbs that flashed across the corner of his vision when the screams reached their peak. At 2:16 a.m. each night, the shadows would freeze. At 2:17, they'd vanish. And at 2:18, a low, wet scraping would begin, like something sharp being dragged across the floor of Unit 4A. On the 12th night, Ethan found something new. When the screams ended and the scraping began, he stared at the seam between the floor and the wall. That's when he saw it. a thin crack running along the baseboard, a crack that hadn't been there the night before. From it, a slow black drip leaked onto his carpet. The liquid was thick and tar-like, pulsing slightly as it pooled. It smelled like burned hair and rust. He backed away, stomach twisting, eyes wide. The drip continued for 6 minutes, then stopped completely. By morning, the puddle was gone. Not dried, but vanished, leaving no stain. The crack remained. Ethan tried to sleep during the day, but even the daylight had changed. The sun no longer warmed his windows. The air felt stale, as if his apartment had become sealed from the outside world. The once distant noises of the city, sirens, birds, traffic, had all ceased. It was like he was wrapped in soundproof cotton, or buried. On day 15, Ethan went searching. He dug through the building's communal basement, a dark, concrete maze that smelled like mildew and was lined with rusted lockers full of old tenant junk. Near the back, buried in a soggy filing cabinet, he found the Briarwood tenant ledger, half-molded pages of lease agreements and maintenance forms. Unit 4A had last been rented to a couple, Marcus and Elise Granger. Moved in 7 years ago, no official move-out date. But there was a handwritten note on the back of their lease. Do not enter. Maintenance request unresolved. Unit condemned. Report filed by Officer Callahan. February 6th. There was no other information. No follow-up. No police report on file. That night, the screaming started earlier. 2:10 a.m. 5 minutes early. This time, the sound didn't come from behind the wall. It came from inside his apartment. The sound that came at 2:10 a.m. wasn't a scream, not at first. It was breathing, deep, ragged, and wheezing, like lungs filled with wet leaves. It came from somewhere within Ethan's apartment, though the shadows revealed nothing. He turned slowly, barefoot on the creaking floor, skin cold with sweat. Every light in the apartment flickered as if wind passed through them, but the windows were shut, and the vents hadn't worked since he moved in. The breathing grew louder. Then the scream erupted. This time it was not confined to the wall. It split the air behind him, full-bodied, as if someone had just materialized inches from his neck and expelled their final breath into his skin. The sound didn't just rattle his bones. It pushed through him, vibrating something buried in his chest. He turned. Nothing was there. But the shadows had shifted. They no longer danced in the corners or flickered in passing. They watched. One of them had shape now, the outline of a head leaning out from the corner of his kitchen, just slightly too tall for a person. It disappeared the moment he made eye contact, but it left behind a chill that clung to his skin like ice. When he looked down at the wall, the crack had widened. The black fluid returned, oozing in thick, slow globs. This time, the stain spread. It flowed in a crooked line along the edge of the carpet, cutting across the room like veins beneath skin. He didn't remember falling asleep, but when he awoke, it was 6:33 a.m., and the trail of black liquid had dried into a perfect semicircle around his bed. The next day, Ethan noticed a change in the building. The elevator was stuck on the 3rd floor. The hallway lights blinked in unnatural sync. The unit across the way, 4C, had its door open slightly, something that never happened in Briarwood. But when he peeked down the hall, the air looked thick, like heat waves distorted the far end of the corridor. He turned back toward 4A. The no entry sign was gone. The tape that once held it now dangled, curling inward like dry fingers. The door itself looked darker somehow, not painted, but stained, as if the wood had absorbed something foul. He approached, bare feet padding across worn carpet. He pressed his ear against the surface again. No screaming, just breathing. This time, it matched his own. He backed away slowly, heart slamming against his ribs. Later that afternoon, he tried calling the landlord again, only to reach a voicemail with a dead tone. He called the city inspector's office, the non-emergency police line, even a paranormal hotline he found online. No one picked up. His phone glitched every time he played back the scream recordings, either crashing completely or distorting the sound into white noise and distant weeping. That night, he set up a video camera, determined to capture what was happening. At 2:05 a.m., the walls creaked. At 2:10, the air turned electric. At 2:13, the room dimmed as if a shadow had passed over the moon, but he checked the window. No clouds. And at 2:15 exactly, the screaming returned, but not from the wall, from the closet. He stared at the cracked door, its wooden slats bending outward slightly. Something shifted inside. Not loudly, but deliberately, like skin dragging across fabric. He didn't move, didn't breathe. The scream this time came from the ceiling, above him, and he watched in horror as dust and black flakes rained from the cracked drywall. A dark hand, long and skeletal, punched through the plaster. Fingers splayed open, twitching in unnatural spasms, and pulled back without sound. When he finally forced himself to move, he checked the closet. Nothing inside. But when he reviewed the camera footage the next morning, the screen was black from 2:13 to 2:19. Completely void. No signal. When the feed resumed, the bed was empty. He was gone. But he remembered lying there the entire time. Then, at 2:23, the camera captured something else. A single frame, less than a second long, of Ethan standing in the corner of the room, facing the wall, motionless. His mouth was wide open, but he had no eyes. On day 19, the floor beneath Ethan's bed collapsed inward. Not fully, just slightly. Enough that the frame leaned. Enough that the bed creaked even when he wasn't on it. When he lifted the mattress, he found rot. Wood so blackened and soft it crumbled in his hand. Beneath that, claw marks carved into the floorboards, deep, angry gouges that spiraled outward like a whirlpool. In the center of it all was a single tooth, human, still wet. The screams that night began at 2 a.m. sharp. The voices had multiplied. What once had been one, then two, was now a chorus, a twisted choir of anguish, moaning and shrieking and gasping. They no longer lasted only 1 minute. They continued until sunrise, ebbing and flowing like a tide of torment. Ethan didn't sleep. He didn't eat. He hardly blinked. By day 21, he had mapped the cracks in the wall like constellations. They had grown, up the ceiling, down the floorboards, into the tiles of the bathroom. The black liquid had returned too, now with the consistency of sludge and the smell of rotting meat. The air in the apartment tasted sour. His reflection no longer moved in sync. At 2:14 a.m. on the 22nd night, the door to Unit 4A opened by itself. No sound, no click. Just a slow, yawning drift as the shadows inside spilled out like smoke. Ethan stood frozen in the hallway, staring at the threshold. He couldn't see much, only a narrow sliver of the room, but he felt the presence, the weight of eyes in the dark, and beyond that, something deeper, something old. He turned and fled down the hallway, but the building had changed. The stairwell led back to the 4th floor. The elevator doors opened to darkness. When he returned to his apartment, his door was gone, replaced by more hallway. The building had become a maze of itself. Looping corridors, identical walls, doorways that led nowhere. Lights overhead buzzed until they popped, raining glass down like sleet. Somewhere in the distance, the screaming resumed. But now, it sounded joyful. Like whatever was inside 4A was finally free. The air inside Unit 4A was colder than the hallway. Not chilly. It felt like a meat locker. Ethan's breath fogged instantly as he stepped through the doorway. The carpet inside had long decayed into patches of moldy fabric and exposed concrete. The walls, once cream or beige, were stained with long black drips that resembled soot, or something much worse. The door closed behind him without a sound. He didn't dare look back. The room was vast, much bigger than any apartment should be. The layout was wrong, the angles were warped, and the ceiling felt too high, like a cathedral built in secret. Light from the hallway didn't reach beyond the first few feet. Everything beyond that was a muted abyss, swaying with shadows that didn't need a source. The screaming stopped. Ethan moved forward, slow and shivering. As he stepped over the collapsed couch frame and broken picture frames, he noticed something strange. The rot wasn't random. It patterned the room. Spirals, symbols, circles carved into the wood and drywall like ritual markings. There were mirrors in the apartment too, dozens of them. Some were broken, others fogged over. But none reflected Ethan correctly. In each one, he looked slightly different, older, thinner, mouth open wider than possible. In one, he had no face at all. He blinked. That one cracked. Then the floor shifted. Not like settling. It breathed. The rot pulsed. The air vibrated. And from the far side of the room, a shape emerged. Not walking, not crawling, just sliding forward, arms dragging behind it like limp ropes. The entity had no eyes. Its skin was thin, grey, almost translucent. It exhaled wetly from a slit that ran down its neck like a second mouth. When it paused, Ethan swore he saw another face ripple beneath its skin. His face. The walls trembled. It was no longer just one creature. From every mirror, a new version stepped out, fractured clones of Ethan himself. Mouths stretched, eyes missing, torsos bloated or broken, all dripping the same black ichor. They circled him but did not touch. Instead, they whispered in one voice. Not words, but the same wheezing breathing he'd heard since the first night. It wasn't a warning. It was hunger.